വളരെ വിശിഷ്ടമായ ഒരു അതിഥിയാണ് ഇന്ന് നമുക്ക് ഇവിടെ കൂടെയുള്ളത്. ശ്രീമതി സൽമ യാക്കൂബ്. Welcome Salma Yaqoob to this program. I think after the British style you should have been Salma Yaqoob. Your great husband, I just met him, but you are still Salma Yaqoob, I think, after the Islamic fashion.
Yes.
Now my first question to you is, we have heard much about you as a leader of a party that claims itself to have no leaders, as a leader of a party that is a combination which some people say, which critics of course say, is a coalition of radical Islamists and socialists. Whatever, we have heard so much about you. But just tell us something about you, because I read somewhere that you used to be a tomboyish girl, interested in playing soccer and all. But seeing you, I find you're such a refined, mature person. Tell me something about your background.
Well, I'm one of 7 children. I'm the second eldest. My parents came from Pakistan. I was born in England.
Yeah, right.
Grew up there, did my degree in psychology, and my postgraduate studies are in counselling and psychotherapy.
Yeah.
Currently I work in the National Health Service
Great.
as a senior manager.
Yeah.
But I was on my political journey really by accident. It was after 9/11 when I saw how my government, the British government, was responding to that tragedy by supporting a war in Afghanistan, which I feared would lead to more innocent people being killed. I felt it was my moral duty as a citizen, as well as a Muslim, to stand up and say, not in my name. I didn't want my taxes to be used in this unjust manner.
So you took to politics following 9/11, the upheaval following 9/11. And there were incidents, I think, you yourself said that once you were spat at on the street in Birmingham because you were Muslim, wearing hijab. So such experiences were there. And of course, that led to a creative intervention in politics. And how did you come to associate with this particular party called Respect? I think it's an acronym of something, including it includes environmental concerns, concern for women, concern for oppressed, and so many other things, including a socialist agenda. How do you combine these various agendas under one umbrella party like?
Respect as a party came about through my experience in the anti-war movement. It started off small and then it became bigger and bigger. In fact, it became the largest protest movement in Britain in 2,000 years of its history. And its success really was because we brought together an alliance of progressive people who may not have had much in common to begin with or didn't appear to, but through our work together it was very apparent that the principles, there was a huge overlap. So between socialists, atheists, Christians, Muslims, believers, non-believers, people who believed in social justice and equality abroad. For me, Respect was about saying we need that same emphasis of social justice and equality at home in England, because the gap between rich and poor was becoming larger. So just as we cared about what was happening to people outside of our country, I thought it was important that we address, for example, our pensioners in England. Although we're the 4th richest country in the world, we have people dying of cold. They couldn't afford the heating bills. Now we have huge loans that students have to take to go to university. When I went to university, it was free. In fact, we had a grant. So the privilege is being amassed by fewer and fewer people, and more people are really experiencing conditions which were more prevalent a century ago. We seem to be going backwards, not forwards in terms of progress. So it wasn't merely accidental, it was because of the alliance that was formed in the anti-war movement.
Behind you taking to politics, you were led by your cause, and the cause in itself was noble. But these were the same causes many other political parties in Britain, for example, espoused. For example, the Labour Party. But once it came into power, they forgot the poor and went for the rich. So this kind of a situation could happen to any party, and tomorrow possibly even to Respect Party. So what prompted you to join this particular movement? Was it its anti-Israeli stance and such stances in some instances, especially its leaders like George Galloway? Were they inspirational to you?
As I said, actually Respect was initially begun by myself, and I approached a journalist called George Monbiot from the Guardian newspaper, because as you pointed out, the Labour Party historically was the party of the working class. So it was the left party, and we have the Conservative Party, which is more party of the right wing. But at the time of Afghanistan and Iraq war, it was the Labour Party in government. So, and also in terms of the domestic agenda, it was more and more embracing the neoliberal type of politics, which we associate more with the right wing. So, for example, we were having the introduction of privatisation in our National Health Service. We're very proud of our National Health Service, which is free for all people, and yet we're having this creeping breaking up and fragmentation. So there were these other domestic agendas which at the time there was no voice. In fact, the way I'd summarise it, our mainstream parties were all supporting big business and bombing. And so the space of the left had been very much squeezed. And I saw Respect as a project of almost the consciousness of the Labour Party. You know, we were the type of people who would have voted Labour, but the gap between what Labour used to stand for and what it came to stood for at that time had become bigger and bigger. And so for me it was about trying to influence the mainstream agenda. It wasn't saying that the Respect Party was going to become a party of government or something like that. It was saying actually it is possible to talk about a politics of principle.
Britain now is almost on crossroads, I think, just like many other countries are, because statistics say that, you know, demographically the whites are going to be a minority in Britain in the year 2060 or probably even before that. And you know, even the politics there is radically changing. How is this politics going to, you know, affect the whole complexion of its, you know, domestic as well as international policies? Because whites becoming a minority in Britain. And also there's a new emphasis, I think, by the new Education Minister of Britain, who says that Britain should be again placed at the center of international politics. Means history should be rewritten or taught in such a way that places Britain at the center of things, plus renewed emphasis on grammar and Britishness and things like that. So what do you think is the future like for Britain going to be?
Well, I think as in all countries, there's always a tension of different ideas. You get progress in some areas and you go backwards in other areas. So I don't think Britain will become a majority non-white anytime soon, but in certain cities, certainly there will be a majority of what were previously called ethnic minorities. So for example, in places like Birmingham, Leicester and Bradford, the largest single groupings will become non-white, but as a country, you know, it will still be a white majority. So the discourse will have to reflect that, though. There has been attack on multiculturalism. You know, Britain was actually one of the most progressive places when it came to the official discourse on
so many things,
integration
and things like that.
You know, so you know, for example, it's not banned.
As it is in France.
In France, so we have a different tradition. The secular space is genuinely pluralistic. So whilst I may be critical of some aspects of government policy, you know, I never forget what is good, and we must hold on to that and build that. Unfortunately, because of the war on terror, there was a scapegoating of the Muslim community, and so the racism under the kind of guise of Islamophobia has become more acceptable. So people will not talk about black people and Asian people and Jewish people in negative ways in an open manner, but you can attack Muslims because they say it's a religion. You know, so although we know that at the moment Muslims in Britain are amongst the poorest when it comes to employment, when it comes to health, when it comes to these issues, but because of the war on terror, Muslims are seen as a threat. So it's a difficult path to navigate. But having said that, for me, I think the future is working in alliance, not just being simply defensive or looking out for the interest of one community, because I think what we have in common is far greater. And in fact, this onslaught and the consequences of neoliberalism, in fact, it started with Thatcher and Reagan.
Okay, you quoted controversy, I think, during a ceremony there in Birmingham or somewhere else. I don't know which particular British city it was. But they were admiring a particular British soldier who had returned from Afghanistan, and you and another member of the council refused to stand up and applaud him because, of course, the act that Britain was involved in was something, of course, of an imperialistic nature, and of course, Britain's hands were not clean. That's at the time you had said that, you know, there's a difference between honoring individual soldiers. I'm ready to honor individual respect, give due respect to individual soldiers, but not to the army and what they are involved in. But what is the fine line that separates the individual soldier from the, you know, the individual soldier is equally responsible for what his country is doing. After all, it were individual soldiers who were responsible for many of the atrocities in Afghanistan and Iraq. So how can you separate individual soldiers from what your country is doing?
Actually, I didn't use the words that you just said. My point was, I was in the council chamber, I was elected, you know, as part of my journey. You know, I helped to form this new party, Respect. I stood for election and I was elected on that platform. And we were having a meeting about the budget. And this wasn't even on the agenda. And part of how they distract when they're about to have huge cuts in the budget, or when they are having unpopular decisions, they distract by saying, oh, we're honouring this, or we're talking about something else. So they just brought in the soldier and this same chamber where they refused to debate the war. Because although we say we stand for freedom of speech, there's actually been very little debate about what this war is, whether we need to have it. In fact, public opinion and all the polls show that the war was very unpopular. The majority of people in Britain did not support the war. And so I feel actually our soldiers are victims of that. We have obviously a democracy, so the soldiers don't get a say where they are sent. This is a politician's responsibility. So my protest about not standing up was not aimed at the soldier. It was saying I refuse to be part of this hypocrisy where the same politicians who are so scared of their own leaders or just want to be, you know, promoted so they stay quiet, they show no courage in actually asking the questions in this democratic chamber about the war. They stand and applaud the soldiers who they send to get injured, maimed, and also who are, you know, in a way, intervening in ways which harm other people. So I saw that as real moral cowardice and hypocrisy. So I thought by me standing and joining and applauding these same politicians, I would be condoning them. So my protest is always aimed at the politicians and the decision makers, not at individual soldiers, please.
That was a point, I think, well made and well put, well expressed. But at the same time, you know, these people were giving, I think he was being given a bravery award or something. Is there anything brave in fighting a country, you know, that has no arms like Britain or America? You are using, you say, Arundhati Roy somewhere has written, I think, you are using a 10 million missile to destroy, you know, what you call as a weapon, or where they store the weapons, that costs only 100 millions, less than 100 millions. There's no bravery in it. At the same time, you were saying that you are willing to send your children to defend Britain. What kind of defending Britain you mean? Are you willing to make them? Are you willing to make them part of the British Army, which at least in the third world is seen to be, you know, synonymous with imperialism and all the vices and evils
of? Again, my words were, I would be proud for my sons to defend my country. So if our country was under attack, then I'll be happy for my sons to be defending. I do not believe in aggressive wars. I do not support imperialism. That has been my whole political journey. And I think sometimes standing up against your own country and showing dissent is a more difficult thing. It's easier to criticize other people and other people's countries, especially when it's your own country going to war. But I believe the intervention in Afghanistan and Iraq is totally unjust. I think bombing the poorest people in the world has not helped. In fact, even despite the fact the richest and most powerful countries have been in Afghanistan, you know, over a decade, it's actually quite shocking they couldn't even declare a military victory. But because when you try and occupy people against their will, you cannot have a genuine victory.